Good evening, everyone. I'm Erica Brown. I work here at Yeshiva University as the Vice Provost and Director of the Sacks-Herenstein Center for Values and Leadership. Rabbi Dr. Mordechai Schiffman is a beloved friend and colleague. He's an assistant professor at Yeshiva University's Israeli Graduate School and the Director of Leadership Scholars, an instructor at Reeds, and a Rabbi Sacks Legacy Sacks Scholar. Rabbi Schiffman serves as the Associate Rabbi at Kingsway Jewish Center in Brooklyn, New York, and he practices as a licensed psychologist. He's the author of Psych for Torah, Cultivating Character and Well-Being Through the Weekly Parsha, and he's just put out a new book, and we're thrilled that the Sacks-Herenstein Center name is on the book. And tonight he'll be talking a little bit about the book and what's in the book, and we'll make sure that you have a link so that you can buy this for all your friends when you go visit them
I'm
for
here.
Thanksgiving. And Shabbat, just inviting all of you to mute so that we
Good
can give
Lord.
full attention to Rabbi Schiffman, and I turn it over to you. Thanks so much for speaking to us tonight, this special week of gratitude, Rabbi Schiffman.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brown. And I am going to start with gratitude to you and to Dr. Weiss and to Aliza Abrams-Koenig, my colleagues who were instrumental in getting this book off the ground through each week of editing. And I would not have been able to do it without your trust and without your leadership and without your friendship. So really, this is a testament to you and to the whole team. So what I would like to start off with is a gratitude to gratitude. And really, the topic of gratitude is one that is near and dear to my heart. This is a screenshot of one of the first shiurim that I uploaded onto YU Torah while I was a rabbinic intern at Kingsway Jewish Center, where I am now still there 15 years later as the associate rabbi. And this shiur that I gave was an outgrowth of a class that I was taking with Dr. David Palkovitz, who is a teacher and mentor of mine who strongly influenced my decision to go into psychology. And it was really the development, research, and presentation of this shiur that instilled within me the love of positive psychology and the love of integrating Torah with psychological wisdom that set me on a path for 15 years later now to have a second book related to these themes. So gratitude as a concept, as a topic, is something that was transformative in my own growth and personal development. So I am grateful to the concept. What is positive psychology? What is gratitude's role within it? And what does it have to do with character development? Is some part that I introduced within the book in the introduction to the book. But to give you a little bit of a glimpse, positive psychology is a movement started in the early 21st century by Martin Seligman, where part of it is related to the concept of character strengths. And they did a lot of research to try to figure out what are character strengths that people generally have that are praised and valued throughout culture and throughout time and throughout religions. And they came up with this group of 24. We are not going to review all 24, but I want to give your attention to one that is in the center over here, which is gratitude. So gratitude is one of the 24 character strengths, but as they started to do research and develop the philosophy and the theory and the practice of the character strengths, they noticed that gratitude seemed to have been one that is not just one of 24, but is probably I don't know, top one is hard to say. But top three perhaps of the character strengths that are essential and important to a life well lived, to happiness, and to flourishing. And that's going to be a key aspect. We're going to look at the religious aspects of gratitude from a Torah perspective, but we're going to connect it explicitly to the concept of gratitude and happiness, which is the purpose of positive psychology, is to help people live lives of flourishing and happiness and well-being. So part of character development is developing gratitude, an essential piece of it. What is character development? So I speak about in the introduction to the book, I quote a psychologist by the name of William Fleeson, who does a lot of work on character. And he writes that those characteristics that are descriptive of actions, cognitions, and emotions and motivations that are considered to be relevant to right and wrong according to a relevant moral standards. From a psychological perspective, character is a blend of thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, as well as motivations that have to do with what's right and wrong. Now, you can see clearly in Fleeson's argument, he is not wanting to take a stance on what is considered right and wrong and what is that moral standards, because psychologists tend to be not immoral, but amoral in the sense that they don't want to determine what is considered right and wrong. But us, as I speak for myself here, me as a firmly believing Torah observant Jew, I have no qualms about adding to that a psychological, spiritual definition of character, which I propose in the book, which is those characteristics that are descriptive of actions, cognitions, emotions, and motivations that are considered to be relevant to right and wrong. So that's verbatim from Fleeson, according to the Torah as traditionally interpreted throughout the ages. Now, I'm fully aware that that definition itself can be debated, and what's considered a Torah approach that is traditionally interpreted and agreed upon is a complicated topic and a meaningful one to explore. But we're going to just take for granted for now that the Torah has something characteristic to say about character that relates to the thoughts, emotions, and behaviors and motivations of developing, of being a person who chooses what is right and stays away from what is wrong in an ethical, moral fashion. And part of character development is inculcating and training people to have ourselves to have the thoughts, emotions, and behaviors and motivations that help build our character. One of the key figures that I quote in the book, Rabbi Sacks was fond of quoting this distinction by David Brooks between resume and eulogy virtues. And really, what we're going to describe as the eulogy virtues is synonymous what we're trying to develop with character, although I would argue that resume virtues also have a place within character. But just to briefly describe what Brooks writes is he says the resume virtues are those that are listed on your resume, the skills you bring to the job market that contribute to external success. In contrast, eulogy virtues run deeper. They are the qualities discussed at your funeral, existing at the core of your being, whether you are kind, brave, honest, or faithful, and the nature of the relationships you formed. And that is the road to characters paved through Brooks, what he describes as the eulogy virtues. Now, what's fascinating is Brooks, right in the beginning of the book, considers the eulogy virtues and the resume virtues as synonymous with Rabbi Soloveitchik's Adam 1 and Adam 2 description of the two types of people from Bereshit chapter 1 and chapter 2, and two descriptions of how man was created as described in the beginning of Genesis. So Adam 1 represents the career-oriented, ambitious side of our nature. This is Brooks's taking of Rabbi Soloveitchik's idea and combining it with the resume eulogy virtue. So Adam 1 is a career-oriented, ambitious side of our nature. The external resume Adam, who seeks to build, create, produce, and discover. He desires high status and to achieve victories. Meanwhile, Adam 2 is the internal Adam, who aspires to embody moral qualities, striving for a serene inner character with a quiet but firm sense of right and wrong, not only to do good, but to be good. Adam 2 seeks intimate love, self-sacrifice in service of others, a life of obedience to transcendent truth, and a cohesive inner soul that honors creation and one's own potential. So Brooks makes the argument over the course of the book to be like Adam 2 people and to be people who focus on eulogy virtues. But the problem is that our society and educational institutions tend to favor Adam 1 at the expense of Adam 2. And if we want to flourish, we need to invest into cultivating Adam 2. What I would argue and contend, and this is something that I teach my students at Azrieli, who are teachers and future teachers who are going to be teaching students about character and midos and moral development, is not to take at the expense of the fact that we also need to teach intellectual skills and resume virtues, because at the end of the day, and we have college students who we teach, we need to help them build resumes that they can be successful and get good jobs. But it's not that the resume virtues need to come at the expense of the eulogy virtues, or that the eulogy virtues need to come at the expense of the resume virtues. One of the arguments of the book, and this is something that's rooted in the research in character education and social emotional learning, is that cultivating character is beneficial for academic and career achievement. So that while character is important in its own right and not just instrumentally for pursuing achievement, a true partnership between Adam 1 and Adam 2 can help people and society flourish in all domains. So we don't want to look at it as this sort of false dichotomy that it's either Adam 1 or Adam 2, but rather it is through cultivating the character that we actually become better at building our resume as well. We don't have to do one at the expense of the other, and that's a key aspect of what we're trying to do in our classes, as well as in as a foundational aspect of this book. What I want to do with you for the rest of our time is to give you a few examples from the book that talk about gratitude, and you'll get a feel and a sense for my orientation and my method of how I go about exploring and analyzing the sources, all a blend of Torah concepts as interpreted through the Mefarshim, as well as perhaps some creative insights come along as well, in discussion with the psychological and philosophical literature related to character. So we're going to have two examples from the book, and we'll even sneak in some Hanukkah related messages to help us prepare for the holiday spirit. So for example number one, growing gratitude. This is based on the Devarim 26, the concept of bringing the first fruits that were grown. You bring them into Jerusalem and eat in it there. Although back then in the Psukim, as we'll see, doesn't say Jerusalem because it wasn't chosen yet. But we brought it to the temple. The first fruits were brought to the temple and eaten by the temple. So the Psukim say as follows: when you have come into the land that the Lord your God is giving you as a possession, and have taken possession and settled in it, you shall take some of every first fruit of the soil which you harvest from the land that the Lord your God is giving you. Put it in a basket and go to the place that the Lord your God will choose as a dwelling for his name. I meant to mention this before I quoted this, but this is actually a translation from the new Rabbi Sacks Chumash. It is a beautiful translation. Highly recommend that you all go out and get your copy if you do not have one yet. Rabbi Sacks's translation is really is fascinating and meaningful, and can be analyzed in his own right when compared to other translations. And I really appreciate his translation of this passage as well. So the people are bringing the first fruits to the temple. The Sefer HaChinuch, famous commentary, actually anonymous, we don't know who wrote it, but in discussing the goals and the purpose of this mitzvah, ties it into gratitude. You have a harvest, you want to show your appreciation to God, so you bring the first fruits to eventually to Jerusalem, to the temple. But I want to look at this if you analyze the process that is described both in the verses as well as how the rabbis interpret it through the Mishnah, in discussion with the psychological literature on inculcating gratitude and the barriers to gratitude, we'll see that there's a way of analyzing this that helps inculcate the character of gratitude in a real way. Because listen, at the end of the day, we've all heard gratitude's great. It's Thanksgiving every year. Gratitude, 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 gratitude. Part of what I'm trying to do in this project is to show that if you go deeper, both in terms of the Torah content as well as within the psychological literature, it will lead not to just a nice idea, but to practical application for inculcating characters and virtues. So here's one way as to how that happens. If you look in the book by Philip C. Watkins, Gratitude and the Good Life Towards a Psychology of Appreciation. So he writes there are many barriers to gratitude. We're going to list two of them from his book, but he lists more. One is envy and materialism, hinder gratitude by focusing an individual's attention on material possessions they lack instead of appreciating the benefits they have received. So that's one barrier, and we'll see how the process of bringing the first fruits is meant to overcome that barrier. As well as narcissism obstructs gratitude by heightening expectations and entitlements from others, causing benefits to be viewed merely as owed compensation rather than genuine gifts, thus impeding the recognition of the gift itself. So barrier one is envy and materialism. Barrier two is narcissism. So how do you overcome materialism? Rabbi Lamb writes as follows. He points to the law is that you would have to bring your first fruits, for it doesn't matter how much was grown. It could be even a small, tiny amount. In Rabbi Lamb's language, for even if a man could afford no more than a kol shehu, even a pittance, still he gave it joyously and enthusiastically. The very first fruits, the symbol of a person's achievement, one's triumphs, and one's success, were devoted to God. So it counteracts the lack. Instead of focusing on the lack, we appreciate the benefit of even a small amount. So the law of the first fruits helps us internalize this concept of appreciating every single bit and not getting used to the hedonic treadmill of once I have it, then it becomes expected and entitled, and then I don't appreciate what I have. Every single detail is important. In addition, the laws help us combat narcissism. So in the Mishnah in Bikurim, the Mishnah states, while the basket was still on his shoulder, he recites from, I acknowledge this day before the Lord your God that I have entered the land that the Lord swore to your fathers to assign us. So he states the Vidui Bikurim, the confession that was required, as stated in the psukim, that you have to recite when you bring your first fruits. As the Mishnah says, you have the basket is on your shoulder, you're reciting it until he completes the passage. He then deposits the basket by the side of the altar, bows, and departs. So there's a ceremony here, and the ceremony requires verbal recitation. It can't just be internal thinking. You have to articulate it, which is an important aspect of gratitude as well. There's felt gratitude. The literature distinguishes between felt gratitude and expressed gratitude. Both have benefits to them, but there's a limit to how much felt gratitude can have, especially in interpersonal relationships when it's not expressed. The expression, the verbalization of the gratitude is essential. And there's also this ritual of bowing and departing that is also essential to the experience of gratitude. And the Rambam states explicitly, what do we learn from this? In the Guide for the Perplexed, he says, the reciting of a certain portion of the law when the first fruits are brought to the temple tends also to create humility. For he who brings the first fruits takes the basket upon his shoulder, proclaims the kindness and goodness of God. This ceremony teaches man that it is essential in the service of God to remember the times of trouble and the history of past distress in days of comfort. So the Rambam explicitly talks about how this ritual combats narcissism by having the person inculcate and internalize humility. And also, just as important, which we'll elaborate on in a future, in our second example, the Rambam here is mixing and integrating positive experiences and emotions of gratitude with purposefully recalling trouble and history of distress. You might have thought that when you're feeling gratitude, you should just focus on the positive, but here it's essential to remember the times of trouble and the history of past distress is another key ingredient to appreciating gratitude even more so. Again, we'll elaborate that shortly. I want to give you one more example from the analysis of Bikurim that is from a different barrier to gratitude. This is from Robert Emmons' book, Thanks, How Practicing Gratitude Can Make You Happier. The first book that I quoted from Watkins is an academic book, readable and recommended if you like, but this book is a popularized book by researcher Robert Emmons, very highly recommended, an easy read, and brings out the essential aspects of the psychology of gratitude with practical tips. And one of the things that he talks about is part of the barriers to gratitude is the business of life, meaning we're so busy that we don't have time to think about all of the things that happen and all the things that are done to us, and we don't have time to write the thank you letters, and we just sort of move on to the next, what's next, what's next, what's next. And part of that busyness takes away the capacity for self-reflection. And I think if you analyze, again, the Mishnah in Bikurim, it's fascinating how the rabbis honed in on how to overcome, assuming this whole thing is about inculcating gratitude. Look at this ritual and process that you have to go through when you are identifying what fruits are the first fruits that you're going to bring into the temple. So the Mishnah says, how does one set aside Bikurim? A man goes down into his field. He sees a fig that ripened, or a cluster of grapes that ripened, or a pomegranate that ripened. He ties a reed rope around it and says, let these be Bikurim. There's intentionality, there's mindfulness, there's dedication. We are specifically taking the time out to ritualize the concept of focusing on the items of gratitude. Then when we went up to the temple, look at the pomp and circumstance that was brought about through this. You could have literally, if you just imagine it, even what Roy Lamb was saying before, you have this one little small piece of thing of fruit that you're bringing up to the temple. But even for that, the following ritual would take place. An ox would go in front of them, his horns bedecked with gold and with an olive crown on its head. The flute would play before them until they would draw close to Jerusalem. When they drew close to Jerusalem, they would send messengers in advance, and they would adorn their bikurim. The governors and chiefs and treasurers of the temple would go out and greet them, and according to the rank of the entrance, they would go forth. All the skilled artisans of Jerusalem would stand up before them and greet them, saying, "Our brothers, men of such and such a place, we welcome you in peace." Right? So they really hyped this up to be something that was so essential and important, and celebrated this accomplishment and this ritual of gratitude in a way that created an atmosphere where this is reinforced and allows you, therefore, to inculcate the habit of inculcating gratitude. So there's a psychologist by the name of B.J. Fogg who created a system what he calls tiny habits. And one of the things that he talks about in terms of when you try to create tiny habits is that he gives a story. He says it has to be tiny, so you have to start. Sometimes we have these big things that we want to create, and we only focus on the big things, and it's really hard to create big habits. So he says you have to start really small. So he says he wanted to try and start flossing. So how would he start the habit of flossing? If anybody doesn't floss and tries to floss, I once heard a comedian say, right, you think it's hard to stop smoking, try starting to floss, right? Because you're tired, it's late, you're exhausted, you started, it hurts, you start bleeding. Like that's not a habit that is easy to inculcate. So he wanted to start flossing. So what did he do? So he's thinking about his research. It has to be a tiny habit. Start small. And then once you do that tiny habit, you have to celebrate that accomplishment. So he literally started this habit by flossing in between two teeth. So he did one floss, and that was it. He stopped and he celebrated. I was able to, and he did that for a few days, and then he built on that to do maybe the next time was two teeth and three, etc. And eventually the habit was created. So we see part of the part here is that it's tiny habits, but more importantly, celebrate those habits. And here I think you get a vision for what's happening here. The celebration is sort of over the top when you think about it. We don't have this in other mitzvos where people just sort of go crazy about doing a mitzvah. But if it's about inculcating gratitude, and gratitude is essential, and we want to celebrate the gratitude aspect, we need to go all out to appreciate the accomplishment of this gratitude. And I believe that that is what is going on within this ritual. So that brings us to the final piece of part one, which is gratitude and happiness. After you read through the parsha, you read through all the bikurim, the first fruits, and the whole ritual, and you stated everything that you were supposed to state. The last verse says as follows: "Then you, with the Levites and the migrants who live among you, shall rejoice in all the good that the Lord your God has bestowed on you and on your household." So we have this ritual of gratitude, and that ritual of gratitude, the way I'm reading the verses, is that then culminates with gratitude leads to the rejoicing, the happiness, right? And that is a pretty firmly rooted finding in the positive psychology research and it's intuitively makes sense, but it's harder to prove, but they've done a good job of trying to get to the core of this, is that gratitude and happiness are two different emotions. They're not the same thing, but that if you want to be happy, one of the key aspects of being happy is by being grateful. And here you have indication that is through the ritual. The way I'm reading it is through the ritual of gratitude that leads to the rejoicing. Gratitude leads to happiness. And we have that as well in the following read of Hanukkah, as interpreted as you'll judge whether or not you like my interpretation or not, but I'm going to suggest it anyway, that it's the same point as indicated in a choice phrase by the Rambam, by Maimonides. So if you go to the source in the Talmud for Hanukkah, The Gemara says, what's Hanukkah? And the 25th of Kislev, there's 8 days of Hanukkah. You can't do eulogies, and you can't fast on those days. And it gives you a little bit of a historical background when the Greeks came to the temple and they made everything impure. All the oils were impure. And then the Hashmonaim came and they beat them and they went to go check after the victory. Can we find any jugs of oil? And they found one jug, and it had the symbol of the Kohen Gadol to show that it was still pure, but it was only for one day. So the miracle was that they lit that for one day, and it lasted 8 days. Okay, we all presumably know the miracle of Hanukkah. But the Gemara closes off by saying as follows: L'shana acheres, the next year, so that happened whatever year that happened. The next year, kva'um v'asum yamim tovim, they made those days into days of rejoicing. It's a Yom Tov, behalel v'hoda'ah, with praise, Hallel, singing song, praise, v'hoda'ah, thanksgiving and gratitude. So that's how the Gemara describes the holiday of Hanukkah and the way it was given over for the future generations. Rashi explains, what is this talking about? So he says that Basum Yamim Tovim B'Halav V'Hodah. What is this holiday? Lo Sha'asurim B'Malacha. Don't get confused, because the word Yom Tov sometimes we interpret as biblical holidays for sure. You're not allowed to do work. So Rashi says, no. Hanukkah, you're allowed to do work. Lo Sha'asurim B'Malacha. It's not forbidden to do work. Shelo Nikba'u. They were only instituted. These days were only instituted Ella Likrot Halel V'Lomar Al Anisim, to recite Hallel. So Rashi's interpreting the word Hallel is to recite Hallel, which is what we do on Hanukkah. And then what's Hoda'ah in the Gemara when it says Hoda'ah, Thanksgiving? Rashi's interpreting that as that it means Velomar al Hanisim, is what we do. We say the text of al Hanisim in no delacha in benching, and when we grace after meals, and hoda'ah in Shmona Esrei when we recite the prayers, we also say al hanisim, thanking God for the miracles in the bracha of modim. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. But watch how the Rambam deals with this language here. It says, Mipnei zeh hitkinu chachamim sheba'oto ador. So the sages in that generation, they instituted shishmonas yamim elu, these 8 days, shetchilatan chamisha besim kislev. The first day is on the 25th of Kislev. So the Rambam says, Yemei simcha v'halel. Okay, so notice, if you're doing a close read here, the Gemara said behalel v'hoda'ah, and the Rambam says simcha v'halel. So instead of hoda'ah, gratitude, which Rashi said we're talking about al anisim, the Rambam inserts the word simcha. And whether he meant this or not, I will be interpreting it that it is showing us the deep and integral connection between gratitude and happiness. Is that by feeling and expressing our gratitude, that automatically leads to a feeling of rejoicing and simcha. So the same message that I offered in the previous slide, that through the ritual of gratitude, when you bring the first fruits, that leads to the rejoicing and the happiness, the same thing would be in this reading of the Rambam, that it is through the expression of gratitude that automatically will bring a sense of happiness. And what I maybe we'll come back to this one at the end. I want to make sure we get to example 2 before we maybe get to another Hanukkah example. But what I want to do, though, is sort of counterbalance that idea that gratitude and happiness are integrally related, which they are, with the fact that, and this is to some extent generated by the following real example that I had giving a professional development workshop just last week, when we were doing a gratitude intervention and people were experiencing, we did the gratitude intervention, we're trying to build positive emotions, build the happiness, and people felt the happiness. And one person asked, the difficulty and challenge that I have with gratitude is that I'm always thinking, but what about the next thing? Right? What about the fact that it's not a full gratitude? There's something still missing. So the truth is that there's an answer to that question within the Torah literature as well. The easy answer is say, okay, so focus on the good things, ignore the bad things. I think the response that we're going to generate is a little bit more nuanced than that. And it's that gratitude and unhappiness can also live together at the same time. They're not mutually exclusive. So, part one, we tried to build up the fact that gratitude leads to happiness, and that is true. But part two is going to say something slightly different and almost counterintuitive, is that gratitude can exist and should exist even amongst pain. And the framework for this is in another essay. This is this week's Parsha, Parshas Vayetze. The essay is entitled Thanksgiving, Praise, and Pain. And the impetus for this is the following series of verses, again translated here by Rabbi Sacks, about Rachel and Leah. So the Lord saw that Leah was unloved. He opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. So Leah now starts to have children. Leah became pregnant and had a son. She named him Reuven, saying, "The Lord has seen my affliction. Now my husband will love me." Okay, so now I'm not going to be hated anymore. I have a son. I'm going to be loved. Is she loved? We're not sure. The next verse says, she became pregnant again and had a son. She said, "The Lord has heard that I am unloved." So apparently she wasn't, the first one didn't solve the problem, right? So the Lord has heard that I'm loved. So he has given me this son also. And she named him Shimon. Okay, problem solved. Now she's loved. Or maybe not. She became pregnant again and had a son and said, "Now that I have borne him 3 sons, my husband will walk with me." That is why he was named Levi. Okay, so 3 sons. Now for sure, Yaakov is going to have to love her. Doesn't say that. The next person says she became pregnant again and had a son. And here's the ending. She said, "This time I will praise the Lord. Hapa'am odeh es Hashem." So she named him Yehudah, from gratitude, from praise, Hoda'ah. So now the question is, how do you read the conclusion here? Is Leah loved by Yaakov or not? Is she giving gratitude that finally, that she has 4 children with him, now she's loved? So Rav David Tzvi Hoffman says, yes, this proves it. She's grateful because now Yaakov loves her. But Rav Soloveitchik says not so fast. Rav Soloveitchik writes it's quoted in Mesoras Harav Chumash. So this time I will thank the Lord. The concept of thanksgiving involves expressing gratitude to God for what has been attained while accepting that it is impossible to acquire everything one desires. Only after her 4th son did Leah finally come to terms with the reality of her relationship with Jacob. A woman has 2 great needs: to be loved by her husband and to have children to whom she can give her love. I would say that might be limiting to some extent, so take that with a grain of salt. But two desires. Leah understood that even after bearing 3 sons, there would be no fundamental change in Jacob's feelings toward her. Rachel would always remain the greater object of his love. With the birth of Judah, Leah finally let go of the hope of ever being Jacob's beloved. Yet she was thankful to God for the 4 children she had to love and care for. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai mentions in Brachos 7b that Leah was the first to offer thanks to God, as she was the first to affirm that God must be praised for any blessing he grants us. The name Judah later became associated with the Jewish people itself. Despite the suffering and persecution we have endured, we remain grateful to God for the privilege of being chosen as his people. The lesson that Reb Soloveitchik is trying to teach us is that gratitude doesn't disguise and gratitude doesn't erase difficulties. Sometimes it is accepting the difficulties and the challenges that allows us to be grateful for what we do have, while acknowledging the fact that we don't have everything that we once desired. So gratitude has the ability to live even amongst pain, and expressing it in pain and difficulty is something that we need to work on if we want to inculcate the full extent of gratitude. And this is also borne out in some of the psychological literature. Robert Emmons, who we quoted before from his book Thanks, has an article called Gratitude as the Foundation for Joy. And there's a few great lines here that I want to share with you that really brings home this tension, this nuance, this dialectic of the pain and praise of gratitude. We are at the dawn of a global gratitude renaissance. There is unprecedented enthusiasm for new scientific information on the science and practice of gratitude. The spark that could ignite a global gratitude movement is the enthusiasm of youthful men and women who discover that grateful living makes life meaningful and fulfilling. But right after that, he says, gratitude elevates, it energizes, it inspires, it transforms. Without gratitude, life can be lonely, depressing, impoverished. In the face of demoralization, gratitude has the power to energize. In the face of brokenness, gratitude has the power to heal. In the face of despair, gratitude has the power to bring hope. Gratitude is the best approach to life. When life is going well, it allows us to celebrate and magnify the goodness. When life is going badly, it provides a perspective by which we can view life in its entirety and not be overwhelmed by temporary circumstances. People who live under an aura of pervasive thankfulness reap the rewards of grateful living. Conversely, those who fail to feel gratitude cheat themselves out of the experience of life. So gratitude has its role and place both within the places to celebrate as well as in difficult times. Gratitude can help reframe and give us perspective to help us move on. And that brings us to Thanksgiving. This was a transcript from Abraham Lincoln's Thanksgiving Proclamation on October 3rd, 1863. This was in the middle of the Civil War. Lincoln writes, the year that is drawing towards its close has been filled with the blessings of fruitful fields and healthful skies. To these bounties, which are so constantly enjoyed that we are prone to forget the source from which they came, others have been added, which are of so extraordinary a nature that they cannot fail to penetrate and even soften the heart, which is habitually insensible to the ever-watchful providences of Almighty God. In the midst of a civil war, of unequaled magnitude and severity, which has sometimes seemed to foreign states to invite and provoke their aggressions, peace has been preserved with all nations. He's able to find the line of gratitude, not delete or erase the fact that there's still calamity and destruction and problems. We can still find the gratitude within what was happening. And then the final paragraph, it has seemed to me fit and proper that they should be solemnly, reverently, and gratefully acknowledged as with one heart and one voice by the whole American people. I do therefore invite my fellow citizens in every part of the United States, and also those who are at sea and those who are sojourning in foreign lands, to set apart and observe the last Thursday of November next as a day of thanksgiving and praise to our beneficent Father who dwelleth in the heavens. And I recommend to them that while offering up the ascriptions justly due to him for such singular deliverances and blessings, they do also with humble penitence for our national perverseness and disobedience commend to his tender care all those who have become widows, orphans, mourners, or sufferers in the lamentable civil strife in which we are unavoidably engaged, and fervently implore the interposition of the Almighty hand to heal the wounds of the nation and to restore it as soon as may be consistent with the divine purposes to the full enjoyment of peace, harmony, tranquility, and union. Right. So the original Thanksgiving Day, as it is cemented onto the calendar as the last Thursday in November, is really rooted in this acknowledgement that even amongst pain and perverseness and difficulty and challenge, we can still acknowledge the good that God has done for us. And you have a little bit of Maimonides in Lincoln here as well, is that part of that celebration isn't just inviting the people you like and your friends, but that you need to do, it is an act of charity to help the widows, the orphans, the mourners, and the sufferers when you are having this Thanksgiving meal. Putting it all together, what we're trying to do in this book is inculcating character. This is just one description of gratitude. I hope you can see some of the method and goals of what we're doing by integrating and blending the psychology and the Torah with the depth to try to get to the thoughts, emotions, behaviors, motivations that underlie character cultivation. And part of what we do in order for that to happen is we close each section with a character challenge and a quote from Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks as part of the Sacks-Herenstein Center. So the character challenge for this week is think of a past or an ongoing personal struggle. Try to identify at least one aspect of the experience for which you can feel grateful and express that gratitude to God. And I encourage you to do that, to take the time. Don't just read it. but the character is developed through activities, through reflection, through doing, through thinking, and through reflecting. That is the only way we can possibly get to gratitude. Just reading an essay is not going to get you there. And to close with a quote from Rabbi Sacks, it takes focused attention to become aware of how much we have to be grateful for. That in different ways is the logic of prayer, of making blessings, of Shabbat, and many other elements of Jewish life. It is also embedded in our collective name. The word modeh, I give thanks, comes from the same word as Yehudi, meaning Jew. We acquired this name from Jacob's fourth son, named by his mother Leah, who at his birth said, "This time I will thank God." Jewishness is thankfulness, not the most obvious definition of Jewish identity, but by far the most life enhancing. And with that, I ask you to keep in touch. Feel free to reach out to me. My email's on this, mordechai.shippen@yedu. Torah of Character is available for purchase on Amazon and Kodesh Press website, as well as my first book, Psych for Torah. If you like Torah of Character, you're going to like Psych for Torah. They're totally different in terms of ideas. Each essay is fresh and new, but in terms of approach and concept of integrating psychology and Torah to help us cultivate character and well-being, there's more essays to be found in there. And I appreciate and am thankful for your time and patience listening to me this evening.